Some cases stay with you long after the cameras go dark. I have been hosting Justice Tonight for 9 years. I have sat across from grieving families, accused killers, weeping mothers, and men who looked me in the eye and lied for 6 months straight. I have learned to read a room the way some people read a book, and in 9 years I have never felt what I felt the night the Hargrove case finally broke open in my studio. That was the night I looked across my desk at 2 people I had been questioning for weeks, and understood, in a single cold second, that they were not the killers, they were just the grief. The real story was somewhere else entirely. And it had taken 3 years, and a dead-end investigation, and a desperate family sitting in my studio for the truth to find its way into the light. My name is Margaret Calloway. I host Justice Tonight on Channel 4 out of Nashville, Tennessee. And this is the story of the Hargrove family. Of what happened in their living room on a Tuesday night in November. Of how a young woman survived something that should have killed her by lying completely, still on a cold floor, and convincing a killer she was already dead. And of how, 3 years later, we finally found out who sent him. Stay with me, because the ending is the part nobody saw coming. Not the police, not the district attorney, not the 2 people who sat in my studio for weeks taking the blame. Nobody saw it coming except the woman who ordered it, and she almost got away with it. Almost. The town of Millbrook sits in Rutherford County about 30 miles south of Nashville. It is the kind of place where people wave at cars they do not recognize because waving is just what you do. Single-story houses set back from the road. Big yards. Families who have lived on the same streets for 3 and 4 generations. The Hargrove family had been in Millbrook since before most of the roads were paved. Ray and Donna Hargrove were in their mid-60s. Ray had retired from the County Water Authority after 31 years. Donna had worked the front desk at Millbrook Elementary for 2 decades and knew every child in town by name. They had 3 grown children. Osman was the oldest, a family physician who had moved his practice to Nashville. Marcus was the middle child, and the youngest was Lydia. Lydia Hargrove was 28 years old on the night of the shooting. She still lived in Millbrook, worked at the county library, and came to dinner at her parents' house every Tuesday without fail. That Tuesday in November, she was in the kitchen helping her mother with dishes, when her father called out from the living room that he was going to put on some coffee. He never made it to the kitchen. The man who kicked in the front door of the Hargrove house that night was named Derek Stills. He was hired. He had a shotgun. He moved through the living room without speaking, and he fired twice. Ray Hargrove died on the floor of the home he had lived in for 38 years. Donna Hargrove was shot running toward her husband. Lydia heard everything from the kitchen. She came through the doorway and saw her parents. She saw the man with the gun. She saw him turn toward her. She saw him pull the trigger. The gun jammed. And in that half-second between the click of a misfired round and whatever came next, Lydia Hargrove made the decision that saved her life. She went down. She hit the floor, and she did not move. The man hit her once with the stock of the gun. Hard. She felt the impact tear something above her ear. She felt the blood on the side of her face. She did not react. She did not breathe. She lay on the floor of her parents' living room with her eyes almost shut, and she listened to her own heartbeat, and she told herself over and over that she was already gone. He stood over her for what she later described as the longest 10 seconds of her life. Then he left. She waited until she heard the truck. She waited until the sound of the engine faded. Then she crawled to the phone on the kitchen counter, and she called 911. And she told the dispatcher what had happened, in a voice so steady that the dispatcher later said she thought she was talking to someone reporting a car accident. Lydia Hargrove survived because she was still enough to be mistaken for dead. And because a gun misfired at the worst possible moment for a man who had come to this house to leave no witnesses. The investigation moved fast at first and then stopped almost completely. The Rutherford County Sheriff's Department worked the scene thoroughly. They had shell casings. They had tire tracks on the shoulder of the road. They had Lydia's account, which was detailed and specific. A tall man in a dark jacket with a face covering. A late-model dark truck. She had seen his eyes. She said she would know them again. What they did not have was a clear motive. Ray and Donna Hargrove had no enemies anyone could point to. No disputes over money. No bad blood with neighbors. The family was described by everyone in Millbrook the same way. Decent people. Quiet lives. No reason in the world for anyone to want them dead. So the investigators did what investigators do when there is no clear motive pointing outward. They looked inward. They looked at the family. Osman Hargrove had been pushing hard for a larger share of the family property following a disagreement with his parents about the sale of a piece of land Ray had inherited. It was not a dramatic dispute by any measure, but it was on paper, and it gave investigators a thread to pull. They pulled it. They found nothing criminal. But the pulling changed things in ways that would take 3 years to fully understand. Because Osman was now a person of interest. And being a person of interest in a murder case, in a town of 6,000 people, is not a quiet thing. Lydia and Marcus closed ranks around their brother the way families do. They defended him publicly and completely. And the defending looked, to people who did not know the family, like people protecting something they knew. Millbrook formed its opinions the way small towns always do, quickly, quietly, with total conviction. By the time I got involved, the case had been cold for 8 months. Osman Hargrove contacted my producer after the local paper ran a piece suggesting the family property dispute might have been a motive. He said he needed someone to look at this from the outside. He said the investigation had stopped moving and he could not understand why. I agreed to meet him. Then I agreed to have the whole family on. I brought in a retired FBI analyst to look at the evidence. I started asking questions on air that nobody had publicly asked before. And that is when things got complicated. I want to be honest about what those first weeks of coverage were like. Because I did not handle everything perfectly, and the record deserves the truth. In the early segments, I was harder on Osman than I should have been, not because I believed he was guilty. Because the property dispute was the most visible thread I had, and I pulled it the way the investigators had pulled it. I asked pointed questions. I brought in people who speculated about family motives. I let the speculation run longer than I should have. Osman sat in my studio 3 times in those first 6 weeks. He answered every question I had. He never refused to come back. He brought documents. He brought the attorney who had handled the property matter. He brought the mediator who had helped resolve it. He was methodical and patient, and I remember thinking that either this man was completely innocent, or he was the most disciplined liar I had ever encountered. His sister Lydia came in on the 4th week. She sat across from me, and she talked about the night of the shooting with a composure that was almost frightening. She described the floor, the sound of her parents, the way she measured her own breathing, the 10 seconds. She talked about it the way someone talks about a thing they have replayed so many times, it has become almost factual. She said she did not know why anyone had come to that house. She said she had been asking herself that question every day for 2 years, and she did not have an answer. I believed her. I have been doing this long enough to know the difference between someone who is performing not knowing, and someone who genuinely does not know. Lydia Hargrove did not know, which meant the answer was somewhere else. I went back to the basics. I pulled everything the sheriff's department had filed. I had my research team map the neighborhood. I pulled satellite records and cell signal data from the night of the shooting. And my analyst found something that the original investigation had flagged, and then moved past without fully examining. The signal data from Derek Stills's phone placed him in the Millbrook area, on the night of the shooting. That had already been established. What had not been fully mapped was his route. He had come from the north end of town. He had parked on the county road that ran behind 2 adjacent properties. 2 houses. Nearly identical in layout from the road. Nearly identical in the configuration of their front approaches. The house directly behind the Hargrove property belonged to a man named Curtis Webb. I ran the name. Curtis Webb had a history I spent a week trying to fully understand. A former relationship that had ended badly. A restraining order that had expired. A woman named Dana Rollins, who had taken out that restraining order 3 years before the shooting, and who had since moved. I looked for Dana Rollins. My team found her in Memphis. I called her. She did not want to talk. Not at first. I called twice more. On the 3rd call, she said something that made me set down my coffee and stare at the wall for about a minute. She said that before she left Millbrook, she had been in a relationship with a man named Brandon Fitch. She said Brandon had been very determined to help her with what he called the Curtis situation. She said she had not known until much later what that determination had cost. She said she had not connected it until she saw my coverage of the Hargrove case. She said she thought maybe she should have called someone sooner. She said she was scared. I asked her to come to Nashville. She said she would think about it. She thought about it for 4 days, and then she called me back and said yes. Dana Rollins sat in my studio on a Thursday evening. She had driven up from Memphis alone. She was 34 years old, and she looked like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time, and had finally decided to set it down regardless of what it cost her. She told the story from the beginning. Her relationship with Curtis Webb. The deterioration. The years she spent afraid to be alone in her own apartment. The restraining order. The man she had started seeing afterward, whose name was Brandon Fitch. Brandon had been attentive and protective in the way that feels like safety when you have been afraid for a long time. He had hated Curtis with a particular intensity that Dana said had sometimes unsettled her, but that she had mostly understood as loyalty. He had told her more than once that Curtis deserved consequences. He had said it the way people say things they have thought about carefully. After she moved to Memphis, the relationship with Brandon ended slowly and without drama. She had been in Memphis for almost a year when she saw a news story about a shooting in Millbrook, an elderly couple killed in their home. A property dispute suspected. She had looked at the address on the news. She had pulled up the map. The Hargrove house was 3 properties from Curtis Webb's house. They shared a back fence line. From the county road at night, you would have to know exactly what you were looking for to tell the front of one from the front of the other. She said she told herself it was a coincidence. She said she told herself for 2 years that it was a coincidence. She said she had gotten very tired of telling herself that. I asked her if she had contacted Brandon Fitch after seeing the news. She said she had called him once. She said he had not answered. She said he had texted her back 3 words. The 3 words were, "Please stay quiet." She had kept the text. She showed it to me on camera. I read it out loud. The studio was completely silent. After that episode aired, I received 2 calls within 24 hours. The first was from the Rutherford County Sheriff's Department. The second was from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. Both agencies had been reinvestigating the case following new leads that had come in during my coverage. Both agencies had independently arrived at a version of the same theory my analyst had been developing. The wrong house. An address confused in the dark. A shooter who had been given a target and had found the wrong door. The TBI had already located Derek Stills. He was in Shelby County on an unrelated charge. When they showed him Dana Rollins's statement and the text message from Brandon Fitch, he did not ask for an attorney. He asked for a deal. He talked for 4 hours. He said Brandon Fitch had approached him through a mutual contact. He said the target had been described to him as a harassment situation that had gotten out of hand. He said he had been paid to frighten the occupants of a specific address. He said Brandon had told him to go in through the front. He said it was dark, and the houses were similar, and he had gotten the number wrong. He said he had not been paid to kill anyone. He said when the old man came out of his chair shouting, and he panicked and pulled the trigger, he understood immediately what had happened. He said he had spent 2 years trying to decide whether to come forward. He said he had decided against it every time, because he did not know how to explain what he had done without destroying himself. He agreed to testify. In exchange for his cooperation on the full case, the TBI agreed to a reduced charge. It was not a clean deal. It was the only deal available. Osmond Hargrove accepted it because Osmond Hargrove understood that justice at this distance from the night of the shooting was going to look like a compromise. He accepted it because the alternative was another year of nothing. Brandon Fitch was arrested at his home outside Nashville on a Wednesday morning. Dana Rollins was with her attorney in Memphis when her phone rang with the news. She called me immediately after. She said she did not know how to feel. She said she had been holding this for 2 years and now that it was out she was not sure what to do with her hands. I told her she had done the right thing. I told her I knew it was late. She said she knew too. She said she was sorry it was late. The trial took 11 weeks. Brandon Fitch's attorney argued that his client had instructed Derek Stills to frighten and intimidate, not to harm. That the shooting was the result of a contractor who had exceeded his instructions. That Brandon Fitch had not anticipated murder and could not be held responsible for an outcome he had not ordered. The prosecution argued that when you hire someone to terrorize a family in their home, you accept responsibility for what terror becomes. That the distinction between frighten and kill is a distinction that exists in a brief filed in a climate-controlled office, and not in the living room of Ray and Donna Hargrove. The jury was out for 6 hours. They came back on a Friday afternoon. The foreperson read the verdict in the particular flat voice that courtroom forepersons use when they have reached certainty about something terrible. Guilty, 2 counts of murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit a violent felony, solicitation of a capital offense. Derek Stills had already entered his plea. He received 40 years. He will be in his mid-70s before he is eligible for parole. Brandon Fitch received 2 consecutive life sentences. He stood at the defense table when the verdict was read, and he did not move for several seconds. Then he sat down very slowly, the way a person sits when they are trying to manage something that is larger than their ability to manage it. His attorney put a hand on his shoulder. He did not appear to feel it. Dana Rollins was in the gallery. She told me later she had not planned to come. She said she drove to Nashville that morning without entirely deciding to, and found herself in a parking space outside the courthouse and figured she had come this far. She sat in the back row. She did not look at Brandon Fitch when the verdict was read. She looked at the Hargrove family. Osmond was holding Lydia's hand. Marcus had his arm around both of them. She said she watched the three of them and she felt something she had been waiting 2 years to feel, and had not been sure she would recognize when it arrived. She called it release. She said it was the closest word she had. I want to close with something that has stayed with me since this case ended. Not about the verdict, not about the investigation. About Lydia. I have interviewed Lydia Hargrove 4 times. The most recent was 6 months after the trial. She was back at work at the Millbrook Library. She had moved into a small house on the north side of town, not far from where her parents had lived. She said she had thought about leaving Millbrook entirely, and had decided against it. She said she was not entirely sure why she had decided to stay. She said something about the town feeling like something she was not ready to give up even after what it had taken from her. I asked her about the floor. About the 10 seconds. I ask her about it every time because I think it is the center of the story. Not the verdict. Not the investigation. The decision she made in a half-second on a cold floor in her parents' living room, to be still enough to be mistaken for gone. She said something this last time that she had not said in the earlier interviews. She said she had been thinking about those 10 seconds a lot recently. She said she used to think of them as the worst thing that had ever happened to her. And they were still that. She was not taking that back. But she had started thinking of them differently. She said she had spent 2 years being afraid that the stillness was somehow passive. That lying there, while her parents were gone, was a kind of failure. A kind of abandonment. She said she had stopped thinking of it that way. She said she had come to understand that the stillness was the bravest thing she had ever done. That holding herself together on that floor and waiting and breathing through everything her body and mind were screaming at her to do otherwise, was not passivity. It was the opposite. It was an act of extraordinary will. It kept her alive. It kept her in the world. It meant she was there when her brother came back to Millbrook, and needed someone to stand beside him. It meant she was there for all of it. She said her parents would have wanted her to be still. She said she knew that, without any doubt. She said they would have understood that surviving was not a betrayal of them. It was the gift they would have chosen for her, if they had been able to choose. I have been doing this work for 9 years. I have sat across from a lot of people in a lot of pain. And I have tried to do my job carefully and honestly, and without losing sight of the fact that the stories I tell are not mine. They belong to the people who lived them. I try to remember that every time I sit down at this desk. I will remember Lydia Hargrove for a long time. Not because of the case. Because of what she did with 10 seconds on a floor, that most people would not have survived. Because of the particular kind of courage that looks, from the outside, like nothing at all. My name is Margaret Calloway. This has been Justice Tonight. If you or someone you know has information about an unresolved violent crime in your community, please contact your local law enforcement or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Persons. The number is on your screen now. Good night. I want to tell you about the Tuesday before the shooting because Osmond told me about it, and I think it matters. He had driven down from Nashville that afternoon to have dinner with his parents. The property dispute had been resolved 3 weeks earlier through a mediator, and he had wanted to sit at the kitchen table and have a normal meal and feel like the family was on solid ground again. He said his mother had made her chicken and dumplings. He said his father had been in a good mood. He said they had sat on the porch after dinner and watched the sun go down over the fields, and his father had talked about a fishing trip he wanted to plan in the spring. He said it was one of the best evenings he had had with his parents in years. He drove back to Nashville around 9. He called his mother from the interstate to tell her he had made it to the highway safely. She said drive careful. She said call when you get home. He said I will. He did. She picked up on the second ring, and said good. I was about to worry. He said Mom, it is a 40-minute drive. She said I know but I worry anyway. He said good night. She said good night sweetheart. That was the last conversation he ever had with his mother. He got the call from Lydia at 11:17. He drove back to Millbrook, doing 90 miles an hour on the interstate, and he said he does not remember a single moment of that drive. He said he arrived at the house, and there were police lights everywhere, and a neighbor had his sister in a blanket on the front steps, and he walked across the yard, and he knew from the way Lydia looked at him. He said he went inside. He said he stood in the living room for a long time. He said he could not make his mind process what his eyes were telling him. He said the television was still on. He remembered that specifically. The television was still on. His parents' Tuesday evening television program. Running to an empty room, he turned it off. He said he does not know why that was the thing he did first. He said it just felt wrong to leave it on. Millbrook is not a town where people miss much. It is the kind of place where if a car parks on your street that you do not recognize, you will know about it by dinner. Several neighbors gave statements to the sheriff's department in the days following the shooting. Those statements were thorough and specific. 3 neighbors had noticed a dark pickup truck parked on the county road behind the properties on the evening of the shooting. None of them had thought much of it at the time. Trucks parked on country roads in Rutherford County are not unusual. Hunters use them. People pull over to take calls. It is not a sight that draws attention. One neighbor had noted the time. She had been walking her dog at 7:40 and had passed within about 30 yards of the truck. She said it was a late-model dark green pickup. She said she had not seen anyone inside, but the engine was running. She said she had thought for a moment about calling someone, and then decided she was being paranoid. She told me she has thought about that decision every day since. I told her she could not have known. She said she knew that. She said knowing it did not help. That is the particular cruelty of proximity to something like this. The people who almost knew. The neighbor who almost called. The woman in Memphis who almost came forward sooner. The gun that almost fired. All those almosts running in a line from a dark truck on a county road to the inside of a courtroom on a Friday afternoon. Lydia was the almost that went the other way. She almost did not make it. She almost did not hold still. She almost could not wait through those 10 seconds. She held. She waited. She stayed. That is the whole difference. One decision in 1 second. A woman on a floor deciding to be still. I have to tell you about Brandon Fitch because I think people who hear this story want to understand how a person arrives at the decision to do what he did. I want to be careful here. I am not interested in excusing him. There is no version of this story where what he did was anything other than catastrophic and inexcusable. But I have been in this work long enough to know that understanding and excusing are different things. Understanding matters. It is the only way to prevent the next one. Brandon Fitch was 39 years old at the time of the shooting. He had grown up in Rutherford County. He had a contracting business. He was by most accounts a steady and hardworking man who had a wide circle of friends and a reputation for showing up when people needed help. He had met Dana Rollins at a mutual friends event, and they had been together for about 8 months when the relationship ended. The ending was not dramatic. They had simply grown in different directions. She had moved to Memphis. He had stayed. What nobody outside a very small circle knew was that in the months before Dana moved, he had become consumed by her situation with Curtis Webb in a way that went significantly beyond normal protectiveness. He had driven past Curtis's house multiple times. He had photographed Curtis's car. He had a file on his phone with Curtis's work schedule and daily route. He had not done anything with this information, but he had collected it with the particular focus of a man who has decided that a problem needs solving and is waiting for the right moment. When Dana ended the relationship and moved to Memphis, something in that focus did not leave with her. It had nowhere to go. He had built it up over months, and it had become a part of how he thought about himself. He had cast himself as a protector, and the object of the protection was gone, and the feeling remained. He reached out to Derek Stills through a man they both knew from a hunting club. He described it to investigators as wanting Curtis Webb to understand that what he had done to Dana had consequences. He said he had told Stills to go to Curtis's house and make a point. He said he had told Stills specifically that he did not want anyone hurt. Stills told a somewhat different version. He said Brandon had told him to go in strong. He said the words "frighten them" specifically had been used. He said Brandon had told him not to leave without making a lasting impression. Neither version produces a clean conscience. The difference between their accounts is the difference between 15 years and 2 consecutive life sentences. In the actual living room of the actual wrong house, the distinction is meaningless. Ray and Donna Hargrove did not survive the legal parsing of what Brandon Fitch had meant to say. He sat in the courtroom every day of his trial with the particular stillness of a man who was trying to understand what he has done. not performing remorse, not posturing, just sitting. I watched him for 11 weeks and I never entirely figured out what was happening behind his eyes. I am not sure he knew either. What I know is that 2 decent people are in the ground in Rutherford County because a man confused loyalty with ownership and protection with power, and ended up hiring someone to solve a problem with a method that belongs in a completely different category of human behavior. He did not think it through far enough. He did not ask himself what happens when the thing you set in motion goes further than you intended. He did not imagine the living room. Most people do not imagine the living room. That is the problem. I want to be clear about something that I mentioned earlier, and that deserves more than a passing reference. I was harder on Osmond Hargrove than he deserved in the early weeks of my coverage. He came to me for help, and I used him as a thread to pull, because it was the most available thread. That was not wrong exactly, but it was not the whole of what I owe him as a journalist. He came back to the studio every time I asked. He brought documents. He brought witnesses to his character. He sat across from me and answered questions that implied things about him that were not true, and he did it with a patience that I found both humbling and instructive. After the verdict, I asked him why he had kept coming back. He said he had not known what else to do. He said the official investigation had stalled, and the local press had moved on, and my show was the one place where the case was still being discussed publicly. He said he had understood that the coverage was sometimes going in a direction that was painful for his family. He said he had decided that painful coverage was better than no coverage. That any light on the case was better than the dark. He was right about that. The coverage drew Dana Rollins out of Memphis. The coverage prompted the TBI to reassign resources to the case. The coverage brought the right pressure to the right places at the right time. It also caused real harm to real people before it found its footing. I tell you this because I think it is important to be honest about what justice journalism actually costs in practice. It is not a clean process. It involves wrong assumptions and corrected assumptions and people who sit in studios and absorb the weight of being questioned for crimes they did not commit, because there is no other available option. Osmond Hargrove paid a price for my coverage that he should not have had to pay. The case was solved and his family got the verdict they deserved. Those 2 things are both true. I owe him better than the first 6 weeks. I said so to him directly. He said he appreciated that. He said he did not blame me. I told him that was generous of him. He said it was just accurate. The last time I talked to Lydia Hargrove, we had coffee at a diner on the main street in Millbrook. She had suggested the place. She said she went there every Saturday morning, and she was not going to change her routine for an interview. The diner was the kind of place that has had the same menu and the same counter stools for decades. The kind of place where the waitress knows your order, and the owner knows your name, and the local newspaper is folded at the end of the counter. For anyone who wants it. Lydia ordered eggs and toast. She drank 2 cups of coffee while we talked. She was calm in the particular way that people who have survived very hard things are sometimes calm. Not the calm of someone who has healed completely. The calm of someone who has decided to be present anyway. I asked her about the 10 seconds again. She told me the same thing she had told me in the studio. That she had come to understand the stillness differently. That she no longer read it as passive. I asked her if she thought about what would have happened if the gun had not jammed. She was quiet for a moment. She looked out the window at the main street of Millbrook. Then she said that she thought about it sometimes, but that she tried not to stay in it too long. She said the thing about surviving is that you have to keep choosing it. Not once. Every morning you have to pick up what happened, and decide to carry it and keep going. She said some mornings that was harder than others. She said she had started volunteering with a victim advocacy organization in Nashville. She said she went in twice a month, and sat with people who were in the early stages of navigating what she had navigated, and she helped them understand the process. She said she was not a counselor, and she was not pretending to be. She said she was just someone who had been in the room earlier, and could tell them what the rooms looked like. I asked her if that helped her. She said yes. She said it was the most useful thing she had found. Not therapy, not time. Being useful to the next person. Making what she had been through into something that served someone else. I thought about that on the drive back to Nashville. About usefulness as a form of survival. About the particular way that some people transform the worst things that happen to them into a kind of currency they spend on other people. It is not universal. Not everyone can do it, and not everyone should be expected to. But when it happens, it is one of the most remarkable things I have seen in 9 years of sitting across from people whose lives have been altered by violence. Lydia Hargrove survived because she was still enough to be mistaken for gone. She went on surviving because she found a way to make the stillness matter. I have been doing this work for 9 years. I will keep doing it. Some cases you close and move past. Some you carry. The Hargrove case I carry. My name is Margaret Calloway. This has been Justice Tonight. Thank you for watching. Derek Stills was 31 years old when he walked into the Hargrove house. He had 2 prior convictions. One for aggravated assault. One for receiving stolen property. He had served 14 months on the assault charge and had been out for 3 years, when Brandon Fitch reached out to him, through the hunting club connection. He was not a professional. That is important to understand. He was not someone with experience in this particular category of crime. He was a man with a history of violence, and a willingness to use it in exchange for money, and who had been given a job that he had approached with a level of carelessness that resulted in 2 people being killed, and a 3rd woman lying on a floor pretending to be dead. He drove to the south end of Millbrook that Tuesday night, using an address that Brandon Fitch had given him from memory. Fitch had described Curtis Webb's house, from the outside. He had described the approach from the county road. He had described the single-story layout, and the front porch light, and the truck in the driveway. What he had not done was write any of it down. What Stills had not done was verify any of it against a map. The Hargrove house matched Fitch's description in almost every particular: same layout, same county road approach, similar front porch configuration. Different address by 1 digit that Stills had gotten wrong in the dark, on an unfamiliar road. He told investigators that when the front door gave way, and the man inside rose from his chair, shouting, he had made a decision in less than 2 seconds. He said his instructions had been to go in strong, and make an impression. He said the man was coming toward him, and he had made a decision. Investigators asked him if he had hesitated before firing. He said no. They asked him if he had said anything to the man. He said no. They asked him what he had been thinking. He said he had not been thinking. He said he had been reacting. He said that is the thing people do not understand about moments like that. There is no thinking, there is just the next action. He described standing over Lydia with the same flat effect. He said he had checked for breathing. He said he had not been able to see clearly in the low light of the room. He said she had not been moving, and he had made the assessment that she was gone. He said he had not wanted to stay in the house any longer than necessary. He left without knowing she was alive. He had driven back out on the county road in the dark, and he was on the interstate before he understood that the address had been wrong. He said he had figured it out from the name on a piece of mail he had seen on a table near the door when he was leaving. He said the name had not been Curtis Webb's name. He said he had known immediately. He did not call Brandon Fitch that night. He drove home. He sat in his apartment for a long time. He did not sleep. In the morning he made coffee, and he looked at his phone, and he did not call anyone. He made the calculation that most people in his situation make. He decided that coming forward cost more than it solved. He went about his life. He spent 2 years going about his life. Then the TBI showed up at his apartment with Dana Rollins's statement, and a cell signal map, and a document from the Rutherford County evidence file that placed his phone at the Millbrook Tower, on the night of the shooting. He sat at his kitchen table, and he looked at the documents for a long time. He said the first thing he thought was that he should call an attorney. The second thing he thought was that he was tired. He said he had been tired since the night it happened, and that the tiredness had not gone away, and that he was ready for it to be over in whatever form overtook. He called an attorney. The attorney called the TBI. The deal took 4 days to negotiate. He sat in the courtroom during Brandon Fitch's trial, and testified for 6 hours. He was steady and specific. The defense tried to discredit him as a self-interested cooperator with everything to gain from shifting blame. The jury listened and made their own assessment. Their assessment took 6 hours and produced a verdict that sent Brandon Fitch away for the rest of his life. Derek Stills will be 51 when he first becomes eligible for parole. Whether he gets it or not depends on things that have not happened yet. What has already happened is not going to change. I want to describe the studio the night Dana Rollins came in because I think the texture of it matters. We record Justice Tonight in front of a live studio audience on Thursday evenings. The audience that night was about 120 people, mostly women. Mostly the kind of people who have been following this case from the beginning, and who have their own opinions about what happened and who did it, and who have been revised in those opinions multiple times over the preceding weeks. Dana Rollins walked in from the side entrance, without any introduction. I had positioned it that way deliberately. She sat down across from me without looking at the audience. She set her bag on the floor beside her chair. She had driven up from Memphis that morning, and she had the particular quietness of someone who has made a decision, and is now on the other side of it. I opened with a simple question. I asked her to tell me who Brandon Fitch was. She talked for 40 minutes before I asked another question. The audience was completely silent. Not the polite silence of a studio audience following instructions. The silence of people who are hearing something that requires their full attention. She described the relationship. She described the way his protectiveness had felt like safety after the situation with Curtis Webb. She described the moment she had understood, looking at a map of Millbrook on her phone in her Memphis apartment. What she was looking at. She described 2 years of telling herself it was a coincidence. She described the phone call to Brandon, and the 3-word text. She showed it again on camera, and I read it again, and the studio went as quiet as it had the first time. At the end I asked her why she had decided to come. She said she had spent 2 years asking herself a single question. She said the question was, what is the right thing to do? She said she had been answering it wrong for 2 years. She said she had come to Nashville because she had finally run out of answers that pointed away from this room. The audience did not applaud when she finished. They did not react with the usual sounds of a studio audience processing a revelation. They just sat with it. That was the right response. Some things do not need a response. Some things just need to be acknowledged. I thanked her. She nodded. She picked up her bag. She walked back out the same door she had come in. I sat at my desk for about 30 seconds after she left, and did not say anything. Then I turned to camera and I talked about the case for another 15 minutes, and I closed the segment the same way I close every segment. Same words, same camera, same desk. It was the same show it always was. But something had happened in it that was different from the standard machinery of the program. Something true had been said out loud in front of 120 people, and it had gone out to everyone watching at home. And the thing about true things said out loud is that they do not go back in. They are out now. They exist in the record. That is why I do this work. Not for the verdicts. Not for the ratings. For the moments when a true thing finally makes it out of wherever it has been trapped, and into the room. For the particular quality of silence that follows. The verdict came down on a Friday in October. I was in the courtroom. I had a producer and a camera team, in the overflow room. I sat in the gallery 2 rows behind the Hargrove family. The courtroom in Rutherford County is older than most people expect. High ceilings, old wood, the smell of decades of proceedings. It has a particular quality of weight that newer courtrooms lack. Every hard thing that has been decided in that county for 100 years has been decided in that room. You can feel it. When the foreperson stood to read the verdict, I watched Osmond Hargrove's hands. He had them folded in his lap, and he was absolutely still. The same stillness his sister had described on the floor. The Hargrove family stillness, waiting for what comes next. Guilty, 2 counts, conspiracy, solicitation. The courtroom did not erupt, the way courtrooms erupt in movies. People exhaled. A woman 2 rows ahead of me started crying very quietly. Osmond put his face in his hands for a moment, and then lifted it. Lydia put her arm around him. Marcus put his hand on Lydia's back. They left the courthouse together. There were cameras outside, and they walked through them without stopping. They got into Osman's car. They drove to their parents' house. Osman told me later that they had not planned to go there. He said they had just ended up there. He said he had pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine, and all 3 of them had sat in the car for a while without saying anything. Then Lydia had said, "Should we go in?" and Osman had said yes. They had gone in. He said the house was the same. The chairs were in the same places. The kitchen smelled the same. He said Marcus had made coffee without being asked the same way their father used to. He said they had sat in the living room for a couple of hours and talked about things that were not the case, about Marcus's kids, about a family trip they had talked about taking for years and never gotten to, about small ordinary things. He said at some point Lydia had reached over and turned the television on. Nothing specific, just the local news. Background, he said. None of them had reacted to it. He said it had just felt right to have the sound of something in the room. He said they stayed until almost midnight. He said he drove back to Nashville, with Marcus asleep in the passenger seat, and Lydia following. In her own car, and he had kept checking the rearview mirror, to make sure her headlights were still there. He said they were always there. I get asked a lot what justice looks like. People want to know if it feels like closure. If the family finally got to breathe. If the verdict made things better. I have learned to answer this carefully, because the honest answer is that justice looks different from the inside than it looks from the outside. From the outside, a verdict looks like resolution, like a door closing, like the end of a chapter. From the inside, it looks more like a long road arriving at a specific marker. The marker matters. The road does not end. Osmond Hargrove is still a family physician in Nashville. He treats patients Monday through Friday, and he has a reputation in his practice for thoroughness that his colleagues describe as remarkable. He has not discussed the case publicly since the verdict. He called me once about 6 months after to say thank you, and to ask how my work was going. We talked for about 20 minutes. He sounded like a man who was getting on with things. That is not the same as a man who is healed. It is a different thing. Getting on with things is its own form of courage. Lydia is still in Millbrook, still at the library. She goes to Nashville twice a month for the victim advocacy work. She told me recently that she had started teaching a class at the County Community Center on personal safety and situational awareness. She said she was not qualified to teach it in any formal sense. She said she just knew some things that were worth knowing, and she was going to share them with whoever showed up. About 30 people show up each month. She sends me a text afterward, sometimes. Just a line or two about how it went. I always write back. Marcus Hargrove moved back to Millbrook 2 months after the verdict. He had been living outside of Knoxville, and he sold his house and bought a place 3 streets from where he grew up. He said he was not sure he could explain why. He said it just felt like where he was supposed to be. Dana Rollins is still in Memphis. She changed jobs about a year after the trial. She works for a nonprofit now. She told me once that she had spent a long time after testifying waiting to feel something definitive. Relief or guilt, or peace, or something with edges. She said what she mostly felt was responsible. Not in the bad way. In the ongoing way. Like something had been put in her hands, and she was going to have to carry it carefully for a long time. She said she was okay with that. My name is Margaret Calloway. I have been in this chair for 9 years. I will keep sitting in it because the cases keep coming, and someone has to stay in the room and ask the questions until the true things make it out. This has been Justice Tonight. Thank you for watching, and good night. The first time I put the Hargrove case on Justice Tonight, the response was immediate and divided. Half the messages were from people who had been following the case locally and who wanted the coverage. They said nobody had been paying attention. They said the investigation had stalled, and the family deserved better. They said keep going. The other half were from people who thought I was exploiting a tragedy for ratings. They said the family had been through enough. They said putting grief on television was not journalism. They said I should be ashamed. I read every message. I always do. Not because it changes what I do necessarily, but because I think it is important to understand what people see when they look at this kind of work. Some of what they see is accurate. Some of it is projection. All of it tells me something about what the case means to people who are watching from the outside. The message that stayed with me longest came in about a week into the coverage. It was from a woman in Memphis who did not give her name. She said she had been watching the show, and she had recognized some details of the case from things she knew. She said she was not sure if what she knew was relevant. She said she had not told anyone because she was afraid. She said she was thinking about it. She did not leave contact information. She watched for 3 more weeks. On the night that I broadcast the cell signal analysis, and the map showing the proximity of the 2 houses she called the tip line, it was Dana Rollins. She had been watching for a month before she called. The cell signal map was the thing that finally made her pick up the phone. She said it was the first time she had seen the information laid out visually, and it had removed the last possibility she had been clinging to that she was wrong about what she knew. She called the tip line at 10:47 on a Thursday night. My producer forwarded the message to me the next morning. I called her back within the hour. I sometimes think about that month she spent watching. 30 days of sitting in her apartment, in Memphis, with a television on. 30 days of weighing what she knew against what coming forward would cost. 30 days of trying to figure out if what she thought she knew was actually what she knew or if she was constructing a narrative out of incomplete information to make sense of something that had been sitting wrong in her chest for 2 years. I think she was trying to find a version of events that let her stay quiet. I think she spent a month looking for that version, and could not find it. I think the map removed the last exit. That is how a lot of information makes it to light. Not through a sudden moral clarity. Through the slow elimination of every alternative. through a person sitting with something for long enough that the weight of it finally exceeds the cost of saying it out loud. Dana Rollins did not come forward because she was brave. She came forward because she ran out of reasons not to. That is a less romantic version of the story. It is the accurate one. I respect it more for being accurate. The town of Millbrook had 2 years to form opinions about the Hargrove case before those opinions were disrupted by the truth. Small towns form opinions fast, and revise them slowly. The initial read in Millbrook was that something in the family was responsible. The property dispute had been talked about. Osmond had been talked about. People had their theories. People always have their theories, and in a small town, the theories circulate until they acquire the weight of established fact, through repetition alone. After the arrest of Brandon Fitch and Derek Stills, the town had to revise. That revision was harder than it should have been because the theories had been circulating for 2 years, and revision requires admitting that the original assessment was wrong, and people are not naturally good at that. Some people in Millbrook revised quickly and completely. They said they had never really believed it was the family. They said they had always felt something was off about the official theory. They said they were relieved the truth had finally come out. Others revised more slowly, and less completely. They said, well, you never really know what goes on inside a family. They said even if Osmond wasn't directly involved, there must have been some connection to something. And some did not revise at all. They kept the original theory. They held on to it because letting go of it required them to accept that they had spent 2 years believing something untrue about 3 people who were already suffering. That acceptance is genuinely hard. I do not excuse it. I also do not pretend it is simple. Osmond told me he had been to the diner on Millbrook's Main Street twice since the verdict. He said the first time had been uncomfortable. He said a few people had come up to him, and said they were glad the truth had come out. He said the manner in which they said it made clear they were not entirely comfortable saying it. He said he had thanked them anyway. He said the second time had been easier. He said a woman had come up to his table while he was eating, and she had said she was sorry, not for anything specific, just sorry. She had not been able to say more than that, and he had not needed her to. He said that had been enough. Small towns are full of people doing the difficult work of living alongside their own mistakes. Most of them do it without any public acknowledgement. They just keep showing up. They keep coming to the diner. They keep passing the Hargrove house, on the way to wherever they are going. They keep carrying what they know about themselves inside their daily routines. That is most of what community is. People in proximity to each other's errors. Deciding over and over again whether to acknowledge them or not. Most of the time they do not. Sometimes they do. That is progress. Slow and incomplete, and occasionally remarkable progress. The Millbrook Public Library is a single-story brick building on the main street 2 blocks from the diner. It has been in the same location since the early 50s. It has a children's section in the back corner with beanbag chairs, and a mural of local wildlife that a high school art class painted 20 years ago, and that has been repainted twice since. Lydia Hargrove has worked at the library for 6 years. She was there when she started, and she is there now, and she says she intends to stay. She said once that the library is the part of Millbrook that remained constant through everything. She said it was there before the shooting, and it was there during the investigation, and it was there after the verdict. And the books were the same books, and the beanbag chairs were the same beanbag chairs, and she'd found that continuity useful, in ways she could not entirely articulate. She reads a lot. That is not surprising. She said she has always been a reader, but that in the years since the shooting she reads differently, more slowly. She said she has become interested in the way stories work. How they build toward something. How they manage the distance between what the reader knows, and what the characters know. She said she finds the management of that distance interesting in a personal way now. I asked her what she meant. She said she had spent 2 years, being a character in a story, where the audience knew more than she did, where everyone watching from the outside had theories, and evidence, and interpretations, and she was inside it, unable to see any of it clearly. She said that had given her a different relationship to the experience of not knowing. She said she was more patient with characters who do not know things. She said she understood now how long not knowing can go on. She recommended a book to me at the end of our last coffee. She wrote the title on a napkin. I bought it that afternoon at the bookstore in Nashville on the way back. I read it over 2 weeks. It was exactly the kind of book she described. A story in which a character spends most of the narrative not knowing something that the reader knows from very early on. The management of that gap is the whole engine of the book. I thought about her the whole time I was reading it. About the floor. About 10 seconds. About the particular experience of being in the dark for 2 years while the light was somewhere else entirely. She recommended a good book. That is a small thing. It is the kind of small thing that feels significant when it comes from a person who has earned the right to see the world a particular way. I have been sitting in this chair for 9 years. I intend to keep sitting in it. I intend to keep reading the books that people recommend from hard places. This has been Justice Tonight. I am Margaret Calloway. Good night. There is something I have not said yet that I want to say now, because it is the part that keeps me honest about this work. This case almost closed wrong. Not almost as in it was close and we caught it in time. Almost as in it was headed toward a wrong conclusion with enough momentum that it might have gotten there. Osmond Hargrove was not going to be charged. The evidence against him was not strong enough for that. But in the absence of a clear answer, the case was drifting toward a version of events that placed the family at the center of a motivated homicide, and left the actual explanation somewhere nobody was looking. The wrong house theory was in the evidence. The cell signal data was there. The geographic proximity of the two properties was documented. It had been noted and moved past because the dominant theory pointed elsewhere, and dominant theories have gravity. I did not discover anything the investigators had not seen. I just looked at what was already there without the weight of the dominant theory pulling me in a particular direction. That is sometimes all journalism does. It looks at what is there without the weight of what people have already decided. That is a small thing. It matters an enormous amount. The TBI told me after the verdict that the coverage had refocused their attention on the cell signal data and the address discrepancy. They had it in their files. They had not been looking at it. My coverage gave them a reason to look at it again, and when they looked at it again, they saw what was there. I am not telling you this to take credit for the outcome. The TBI broke the case. Dana Rollins made the call. Derek Stills made the deal. Those are the people who broke it. I am telling you this because I think it matters to understand what journalism, in a case like this, actually does. It does not solve crimes. It keeps pressure on the questions that need to stay open. It makes it harder for a wrong answer to settle into place just because it is the most available answer. 2 people died in their living room on a Tuesday night because of a misfired address, and a man who hired someone to frighten a woman he was no longer seeing into a problem that was already resolved. That story almost became a story about a family property dispute, and a son with a motive. It almost closed that way. A young woman in Memphis watching a television program drove to Nashville, and prevented that from happening. I think about how thin that margin is. One woman in one city watching one program over 30 days and deciding to call the margin between truth and a permanently wrong answer was that thin. It is always that thin. That is the thing this work teaches you over and over. The margin between what is true and what gets recorded as true is always thinner than it looks. It requires people to be in the right place, paying the right kind of attention, at the right time. It requires things to go a particular way when they could easily go a different way. It is not reliable. It depends on contingency and luck, and the willingness of one person to pick up the phone on a Thursday night at 10:47. I do not have a solution to that. I just keep sitting in the chair. I keep asking the questions. I keep answering the phone when it rings. That is the whole job. That is all of it. My name is Margaret Calloway. I have been hosting Justice Tonight for 9 years. I intend to keep hosting it for 9 more. This is the work. This is what it costs. This is what it is worth. Thank you for being here. Good night. I want to say something about Ray and Donna Hargrove before I close this case entirely. Because in 9 years of doing this work I have noticed that victims sometimes disappear into the machinery of their own cases. They become the reason for the investigation. The reason for the trial. The reason for the verdict. And in becoming all of those reasons, they sometimes stop being fully visible as people. Ray Hargrove retired from the County Water Authority after 31 years. He had started there at 22 as a field technician, and worked his way to department head. His colleagues described him as the kind of supervisor who knew everyone's name and remembered what was going on in their lives. He coached his son's Little League teams for 8 years. He had a vegetable garden in the backyard that his wife said he took more seriously than anything except his children. He liked fishing in old westerns and the Nashville Predators, and he had never once in his adult life missed voting in an election, local or national. Donna Hargrove worked the front desk at Millbrook Elementary for 19 years. She knew every child who came through those doors. She kept a jar of individually wrapped candies on the corner of her desk, and she had a rule that you had to tell her one good thing about your day before you got one. The principal at the time of her death told me that the rule had been in place for 15 years, and that she had never once been told there was nothing good. She had a gift for finding the good thing in people. She had used it every day for 15 years on children who sometimes had very little good to report. They were married for 41 years. They had raised 3 children in the same house. They had sat on the same porch, watching the same fields go through the same seasons for 4 decades. They had made coffee and watched television and argued about small things, and agreed about large ones, and built a life that was ordinary in all the ways that ordinary is the highest possible achievement. They died on a Tuesday night because a woman in their county had been in a bad relationship, and the man she started seeing afterward had decided to handle it in a way that put a hired man with a gun on the wrong front porch. They did not know Brandon Fitch. They had no connection to Curtis Webb. They had never heard the name Derek Stills. They were sitting in their living room on a Tuesday night, and the door came in and that was the end of it. No warning. No reason they could have understood. No way to protect themselves from something that had nothing to do with them. Ray Hargrove was coming up from his chair when Derek Stills fired. That is in the record. His son told me he had always been like that. Always the first one to stand up when something needed addressing. Always moving toward the problem. Always certain that standing up was the right response. He was right about that. He was just standing up in the wrong moment. A moment that had been set in motion by people who had nothing to do with him, and that arrived at his door through a chain of events, so arbitrary, and preventable and stupid that the only word for it is tragedy in its oldest and most literal sense. He deserved more mornings on that porch. She deserved more Tuesdays at that front desk. They both deserved the spring fishing trip Ray had been talking about. They deserved 42 years and 43, and as many after that as they could get. They deserved to grow old in the house they had lived in for 38 years, and to watch their children find their way, and to have grandchildren underfoot on holidays, and to sit in the porch chairs they had sat in for 4 decades and watched the fields go through the seasons one more time. They deserved all of it. They did not get it. A chain of careless human decisions took it from them on a Tuesday night in November. That is the last thing I will say about this case. Not the verdict. Not the journalism. Not even Lydia on the floor. The last thing I will say is that Ray and Donna Hargrove deserved better than what happened to them, and I want that on the record, and I want it to be the last thing you carry out of this room tonight. Remember their names. That is all. Just remember their names. My name is Margaret Calloway. This has been Justice Tonight. Good night.